welcome to the next episode of my Safe Bet Show. And it gives me a great pleasure, and it's of course a privilege to welcome Michael Auer on the show. Welcome, Michael. Great to have you.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. For those of you who may not know, no matter how unlikely that is, Michael is the founder of Neccton, and I believe these days Neccton is owned by OpenBet.
That's right.
Let me move on to my very first question that will focus on statistics and psychology. And it's very exciting because this is truly the first time that we've been tackling this issue on this podcast. And that is because you, Michael, happen to hold a master's degree in psychology and statistics from the University of Vienna. And you also got your PhD in psychology at Nottingham Trent. So would you perhaps mind illuminating us as to how these two disciplines interact and what are the practical implications of that interaction?
Yeah, so you got it right. PhD from Nottingham Trent, and I did my master's in Vienna in Austria because I am Austrian, as most of the listeners probably will be able to identify. And, like most psychology students have this romantic vision of becoming therapists when they enroll into those studies. And they are, quickly sort of, mostly negatively surprised when they attend the first lectures, and it's all about actually statistics, mathematics, and numbers. And psychology is much more about, measuring personality through different questionnaires and things like that, and then scoring people on different scales, whether it's depression, whether it's excitement, whether it's personality traits like extroverted, introverted, and so on and so forth. And I, when I started enrolled in psychology, I was pretty open-minded, and in fact I liked the mathematical aspects of it. And I never, thought, about, really sort of, going into psychotherapy or anything like that. That sort of, was really sort of, kind of more like a side, like an idea for myself. And that's why, I enjoyed it. And then I thought, I can, sort of dig deeper there. And then I also studied statistics. And if you read, papers, for example, gambling research papers in psychological journals, then you will quickly realize that somebody will only be able to write a paper if they are to some degree statistically skilled, or if they have to some degree access to statistically skilled people who will help them perform the analysis, write the results, draw the conclusions. And it's all about significance, right? In academic research, we only talk about things which are statistically significant, and we won't sort of dig so deep there as to discuss the philosophy of statistical significance testing, which goes back to Sir Karl Popper, who was kind of, famous statistician. And it's actually more of a philosophical, assumptions than really mathematicals, which are behind statistical testing.
But I believe I can relate to that. I was a lawyer once, and look where I've landed, or better or worse. This also could be used, and I will do that as a segue into my next question. It's slightly a lighter touch one. Did you always want to be a statistician when you were a kid? And I have to say that I absolutely love sports statistics, so I can actually imagine myself being a statistician. But was that your childhood dream, or did that come about only later?
Statistician, most people connect like counting, peas, counting objects, whatever, or maybe census, with statistics like how many, people live there, live here, what about the demographics, etc. for me, statistics is much more about detecting patterns, patterns in large numbers, because if you have large numbers, then you will see sort of, the true patterns. With small samples, single people you might talk to about certain aspects, you might receive individual opinions, but if you sort of do this on a larger scale, then something kicks in, which in statistics we call the law of large numbers, and you will have patterns, whether this is political polls or any other opinion research, or at the end of the day gambling research. So for me, statistics is a lot about identifying patterns. Of course, in my sort of profession, it's about behavioral patterns, it's about human behavior, and in particular it's about gambling.
Thanks for that. Let's talk about our friend, Professor Mark Griffin. Needless to say, a big gun and a legend in gambling harm-related psychology, just like yourself, of course. You guys have worked quite closely together for years and years. So what is it like to have worked with him, and in what way is his, we'll come to talking about your research as well, his research different from what the industry may get to see from other organizations in this space?
I mean, he's a very special person in a very, positive way, of course. And, he realized very early on, and I think goes back to 1993, when he said, that gambling operators could actually utilize data to gain deeper understanding into behavioral patterns. And when we met first time in 2008, there were very few studies based on actual player tracking data by Howard Shaver, Julia Braverman, etc., right, the Harvard affiliate group. And then we started to delve into that subject. And I can only say, the work is great. So, I mean, like if I write up a paper, which takes me, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and I send it to him, I can be sure that the next day I have a response. And he pretty much redlined my entire document. So he reads everything, he rewrites everything. And, I even sometimes, do, attempt to find out whether he just does it for the joy of rewriting stuff, or whether my English is really so bad. But, I think it's a mix of both. So we have a very, high frequency of interaction when it comes to writing something up. And I can only say he contributes really. I mean, he publishes a lot of stuff, not, only gambling research, but behavioral addiction research in totality, like gaming, sex addiction, I don't know, everything, which is sort of behavioral addiction related. And what I do sort of, is a small percentage of the research out that he puts out there. And our research is mostly 99% based on actual data from actual players.
Let's look, if we may, behind the scenes of the articles that you have authored, 40 plus, and I'm sure counting, peer-reviewed articles on a variety of topics such as limit setting, personalized feedback, or self-exclusion. So how long, if I may start there, how long would you typically spend on coming up with the idea and then studying it, researching it? I'm sure our audience would love to hear that, because they may not be familiar with the creative process. It's not just, I suppose, about writing it all up.
It's about, sort of an idea needs to come to my mind, right? And for example, let's take the latest the last year I published a paper about chasing losses. So I thought, for quite a long time, I thought, okay, chasing losses is something everybody seems to connect something with it, right? So anybody I talk to in the gambling industry will sort of connect something with chasing losses. But let's say if we discuss now what is it really, right? How could you sort of measure it? Then probably 5 people will come up with 6 different opinions. And then I thought, okay, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna think about, okay, what could you do, right? So and then I operationalized it, and I thought, okay, if somebody gambles on day one and I correlate, their loss with their amount wagered the next day. And that's, one way to look at chasing losses. And that's actually how the DSM-5 operationalizes it. Do you come back the other day and, gamble more if you lost the day before? And then, I'm thinking about those things. I go into the data and, we have lots of data from all sorts of operators around the world. I play around a bit with the data. And then, for me, basically, that's the point when my sort of thinking about it is finished. And then I go into execution. Execution means I analyze, right? I produce the results. I produce all the tables, all the charts, all the figures. And then comes the most painful part. Actually, something I'm working on right now is I have a blank, Word document. I first think of a title because that helps me to sort of guide myself, right? I need a title, right? Something, really, that's almost like 99% the final title I'm going to have. And then I'm going to write the introduction. And every introduction is basically the same. It's about, okay, problem gambling, online gambling, like online gambling and problem gambling. And there's just so many studies out there, right? So this year I almost published, I think I'm about like 9 papers or 10 published papers. And like the introduction is pretty much the same everywhere, but you cannot plagiarize yourself. I mean, in other research areas, you can refer to a paper and just write an update, right? In psychological research, or at least those journals we are publishing in, you have to write an introduction every time. But if you have 2 very similar papers that you're publishing, let's say I do a paper about limit setting and another one about limit setting, maybe one with UK players, maybe one with Ontario players, still, I have to come up with an introduction, which is completely different because otherwise, I'm accused of plagiarism. So I have to come up with something that's completely different. So I do not sort of copy my own introductions, but basically I sort of wipe my slate clean and I completely start from scratch. And that sort of takes me, I don't know, a day basically to write this introduction. And from that, it's basically standard procedure. It's about methods, like which, methods to use. You describe your sample, you write up the results, and the last part is the discussion. But all in all, I would say, a month or something, or a month and a half, until, we have finished all the iterations between me and Mark Griffin and, my co-authors. And then, we submit it to a journal.
Thank you very much for the very useful insight into the creative process. As an occasional columnist, I do feel the agony, or your agony, of having a blank page in front of you, trying to write something up or get something started. And, well, I also suppose that we could be talking about or we could be having a philosophical debate about whether self-plagiarism counts as plagiarism. Could you plagiarize yourself? But let's brush that aside. This research is truly appreciated by the industry, but it's also here, or it's designed to be applied, because at least in my book, it would be a shame if it just got published and then collected some dust on the proverbial shelf. And I'm by no means suggesting that would be your case, but could you tell me a little more about how your research, past and present, is being applied across the industry and how it's helping the online gambling operators to retain their customers?
Yeah, I hope it is. I mean, I can't really tell for sure. But, what sort of course, I think every researcher who works in a sort of practical subject area, is happy, or, it brings sort of, it satisfies them to some degree if the research is really, applied in real world, And in our case, so for example, the example about chasing losses that I mentioned before is an operator or, a gambling company. I mean, such, as, yourself could basically use our research and translate that into behavioral tracking metrics, right? They could basically, pick up the paper and, go step by step and, use our findings and, translate it, for example, to identify chasing losses, ultimately, potentially problem gambling. I mean, at Neccton, of course, we also have a commercial, sort of course, there is, a commercial aspect to it. But sometimes, like last year at iGaming Next, a lady from a gambling company walked up to me and said, "Yeah, Dr. Auer, it's nice to meet you. And so, I read all the research, and we built our gambling algorithm exactly, following your research. I mean, that's something which, of course, is very flattering from research point of view. Commercially, right? You would rather want them sort of, to contract your services. But that's, simply, I think, for me, it was always very important to be transparent, right? I mean, everything that we do, we publish it academically. Of course, somebody could come along, right? And they, simply do it themselves. But, this is just, one of the caveats, that you sort of course, agree to if you are, putting all your research out there.
And I should, of course, have referred to you as Dr. Michael Auer. Credit where credit is due. And I would strongly suggest that indeed Neccton is a practical embodiment of your applied research efforts. So would you mind giving us a little insight into Neccton's origin and its evolution, and where is it headed now being owned by OpenBet?
Sure. So it all started, I would say it goes back to about 2003 when me and Andreas Schneeberger, who is the co-founder, met at a actually data mining company in Vienna. And back then, what we call AI, machine learning, back then they call it data mining. And then sort of, we started Neccton, a precursor of Neccton. Neccton, the legal entity, was established in 2008, but we started to work together about 2004 and started to work with the Austrian Lotteries Casinos Austria in 2005. And they have an online casino which actually dates back to 1996. And we helped them in the beginning, actually helped their CRM department in the beginning. So there it was really all about, understanding online gambling behavior, identifying cross-selling, upselling potentials. Everything, that you would still do to this day, to sort of, optimize your and target CRM purposes. But that wasn't, limited to gambling. We also worked with insurance companies, banks. Every type of B2C company which has a very large customer base, which is identified, telecommunication companies, everywhere, you could sort of gain a benefit from analyzing, large patterns and identifying potentials. And in 2008, I met Mark Griffin, and then actually this, the responsible gaming journey started.
Yeah, and good on OpenBet, a great transaction. In my book, I was going to say that Dr. Michael, is not only a psychologist and statistician, it's turning out that he also happens to be a data miner. So you're definitely living a very entertaining and fanciful life. Going back, if I may, to the gambling industry, and dramatic music, please, the UK white paper. You've, of course, had a long-term exposure to regulatory and other developments in the UK. So where do you actually stand on the white paper consultation and on the key principles that underlie the white paper and, I suppose, by implication, the future regulation in the United Kingdom?
A tough cookie. We responded to the white paper a couple days ago with respect to those, areas where I feel I am competent and skilled. And what I really sort of welcome in the white paper and generally with the UK regulation and where it's headed is towards the personalization, right? Towards personalizing the approach and actually the prevention, because still you have a lot of discussions in other jurisdictions or with gambling operators, which are very much focused on identifying problem gambling. It's all about, algorithms, how can we identify whether somebody, might, whether there might be an underlying, problematic gambling behavior. But of course, that's a valid question and something, that's of course very important to cover with the data. But the biggest benefit for me really with that, we have and that operators have lies in the prevention, because there is a direct connection between the operator and the player, and they can communicate with the player at any point of time. They can nudge players towards, healthy behavior as very, very early on. They can be transparent and, they, are empowered. They can empower the person really, to prevent actually overspending. And that's something, that's pretty sort of, important, significant in the white paper. And that's something, I endorse not only with the UK regulation, but partly also, we have other European countries like Spain, Sweden, Denmark, partly also Germany, which, at least mention the importance of personalized feedback as an instrument to prevent problematic gambling.
Absolutely, I can't agree more. And I would suggest that this is indeed what the whole white paper debate is meant to focus on. Hopping across the pond, Michael and I have just already, let me rephrase, I've just had the privilege and pleasure to have shared a panel with Michael at G2E. If you fancy that, the audience, go and look that up. But responsible gambling in the US. We've tackled the UK. You've kindly also mentioned Europe. At the risk of stating the obvious, the US has been through a true sports betting revolution in the last 5 years. And we're talking about legalized betting. So in your view, or from your perspective, how different is the approach to responsible gambling in the United States from what you've had a chance to see firsthand in the UK and Europe?
I'm probably less an expert in the US. You're much more an expert there. And correct me, if I am now missing something about it. So in the US, I'm aware of the New Jersey, the DGE, the rules that the DGE introduced. And as I said before, so those rules are pretty much focused on identifying overspending, like, high spendings, multiple self-exclusions, things like that. And they focus very strongly, of course, on the detection of somebody who might already have a problem. But, there is less granularity, less detail when it comes to prevention aspects. And what I also see in the US is that there is a big, like, distinction between iGaming and, sports betting, right? So basically those two things are often mentioned quite separately. But of course, we have to keep in mind that these days, sports betting, and especially with in-play sports betting, with, the large offer available, is very close in terms of, for example, event frequency to online casino gambling. And very often sports betting might be seen in a different way, less harmful, etc. But of course, with increased digitization, more, available and different, betting patterns and offers, sports betting is almost equal, to online casino gambling when it comes to the structural characteristics. But there are a lot of US states which do not, require any player monitoring, anything in terms of markers of harm. Correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think?
Well, you are spot on. It's work in progress, and I should be hopeful that more and more states will take cue from the good old garden state of New Jersey. In general, it's very clear to me that perhaps the industry could use rolling out Michael Auer as part of its lobbying efforts to get iGaming finally regulated in more than 8 states. In all honesty, my next question might turn out to be rather foolish, but I'll ask it anyway because we've got the ultimate expert on the call. Suppose there's no panacea or silver bullet when it comes to responsible gambling tools. Every customer is different. But Michael, in your experience, are there perhaps tools that are more efficient than others? Or which group of tools would you put on the top of your list to protect our customers?
I mean, like I said before, maybe I'm also a little bit biased here because this is my favorite, research subject. But it's personalization. I mean, it's less a tool that players would use, but it's the tool that the operator are in control with. That's why typically those are not mentioned as responsible gaming tools. Traditionally, like you said before, voluntary limit setting is a typical tool, a voluntary self-exclusion. We have play breaks. And then, we have those types of tools that, operators sort of control: personalization, personalized messages, pop-up messages. I mean, I think nobody would, argue limits won't work because, we know they do. And although, some players might not use it as often, as we'd like to, they work. And it's also about the operator promoting it, because you could have, let's say, limit setting, and you have operator A, and let's say 5% of the active player base have a limit. Operator B, 30% have a limit. And here it's all about how does an operator promote it, because you can't see, the tool, a tool like in isolation, but it's a lot about how is it actually promoted, by the operator. How is it mandated by the regulation? You have regulations where players do not have to, set the limit, but the operator has to offer it. Then you have other regulation, for example, Spain, where every player starts with a default limit. There is a default daily deposit limit, a weekly deposit limit, and a monthly deposit limit, and players are free to change those, but those are default. So, it's all, you have to see it in connection. And let's say, for example, in Germany, you have the 24-hour, the panic button. That's another, tool, you could say, short time self-exclusion. And, what some players in forums say is they actually don't use it sort of to exclude for problematic reasons, but they actually exclude for 24 hours to protect their withdrawals. So what they do is they win something, they withdraw, and then it takes some time until this withdrawal is executed. And in order for them to prevent canceling that withdrawal and re-gambling all their winnings, they exclude, right? Sort of as a, how do you say, kind of a conscious decision. And so everything needs to be, seen in isolation. But I totally don't agree with, some research which was published a couple of years ago, which would say voluntary limits make no sense. We have to introduce mandatory maximum spend limits because people can control themselves, right? That's absolutely not true. And it's a lot about, operators, promoting those tools the right way for players to be able, or to use them more frequently.
Yeah, it would be, I would suggest, a fallacy to argue that people can control themselves. So every now and then I still can. That's why that Patriots helmet's still on that shelf, but it might be flying away. Given the results the Patriots have had this season, just to give you an example of self-control, but I'm going off tangent. We're actually hitting the home straight of this podcast. So, Michael, it may not be a fair question, but I ask every single guest of mine to summarize their thoughts and distill them down into 60 seconds. So it's all yours to firmly cement your place in the Responsible Gambling Hall of Fame. 60 seconds for you to convey any messages you like. We're filming ahead of the holiday season. It could be about the world-renowned Vienna Christmas markets, or it might be about responsible gambling. Neccton. Up to you.
I pull up my Amazon wish list. Feel free, everybody, to order one or more items from that list. No, I think, for me, I'd like to continue what I've been doing for the last couple of years and really, publish more studies. And the studies, I'm mostly interested in now are really the experimental ones, where you do not only use secondary data, but you have, the option to sort of manipulate conditions, like, okay, player one gets this type of, RG tool, player 2 gets this type of RG tool. So we can really draw, cause and effect relationships. And, I really want to promote, and, for me, let's say, in 5 years, I'd like to see most operators really, being transparent with their players, providing them information, providing them self-assessments, self-tests, and personalized feedback. Just like, it's very common in marketing to do that, it should also be very common in the area of responsible gaming. And, to have more researchers like myself and Mark work with data provided by operators, because this is the only way how we can, gain more understanding into player behavior, and how we can design effective tools that promote responsible gaming, healthy play naturally. And that's also something which is important to mention, is you will never come down to zero problem gamblers, right? Because it's a continuum. You will always have people who develop an issue, not only with gambling, but maybe, with fandomship to certain clubs, or with, online shopping, or I don't know what. Yeah, exactly. And there also always be a continuum, but it's about, identifying those and trying to prevent, players developing issues. And it's all, in operators' hands and, regulators' policy, but hopefully we as researchers, and responsible operators like yourself can drive regulation, and, have regulation, especially, in the US, that makes sense, that sort of, is business intelligent, but on the other hand, also protects the vulnerable.
You truly make this industry a better place. Thanks for coming onto the show, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the one and only Dr. Michael, if you will, Michael Auer. My name is Martin Lycka. This is the latest episode of the Safe Bet Show, and I shall see you next time.